Hello students, welcome to Notebook. Pilgrimage was an important part of a medieval European Christian's life. They often went on pilgrimages to shrines of martyrs or to big churches. Have a look at this woodcut from the second edition of the Canterbury Tales, published by William Caxton and written by Geoffrey Chaucer. The book, published first in 1400, describes a storytelling competition between pilgrims as they travel from London to the Canterbury Cathedral to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. The monk, the friar, the squire, the cook, the miller, the knight, the nun, and others give us interesting insights into the colorful and fallible society of the times. These characters were all part of the feudal society of France and England. The origins of feudalism can be found in the Roman Empire during the rule of Emperor Charlemagne as early as the 8th century. However, feudalism as a social, economic, political, and legal structure was established in the 11th century. It first emerged in France and then spread to England and Italy. In simple terms, feudalism resulted in agricultural production through a symbiotic relationship between lords or landowners and peasants. The seigneur or lord provided the peasants with military protection and judicial assistance in exchange of labor on their lands. The region of Gaul was named France by a Germanic tribe called the Franks. The Christian Frankish or French kings became legitimized rulers because of their close association with the church, and especially after the Pope bestowed the title of Holy Roman Emperor upon King Charlemagne in 800 AD. The feudalistic French society had three orders or categories of people identified by their professions: the clergy, the nobility, and the peasants. The first order was formed by the clergy that comprised of bishops, priests, and clerics. The bishops, priests, and clerics guided the Christians among their local communities in Europe. The Western Catholic Church was an important institution and establishment which framed several laws and had the Pope at its head. The churches and the clergy across Europe were influenced by the feudal culture of the times in its customs and social relationships. The feudal lord granted lands to each church, thus enabling the church to levy taxes from the lands. The churches ran on 1/10 of the produce of the land, called the tithe, and on endowments or donations made by the rich people. The rich were God-fearing, and they made these endowments for their own welfare or for the welfare of their deceased family members. The priest presided over the Sunday Mass at the churches, which the Europeans regularly attended. The priests led a celibate and devout life, and strict rules barred many from becoming priests. Just like the upper caste Brahmins, who were the gatekeepers of religion in the Hindu societies, the Christian priests too formed a small section of the society. The serfs or laborers, women, and the physically challenged could not become priests. The clerics who served the church lived in towns and villages among the common people to overlook the religious activities of each region. The monks and nuns formed other organizations called the monasteries or abbeys, which were removed from the hustle and bustle of daily life. The monks and the nuns lived celibate and private lives of prayer, studying and manual labor in their separate single-sex communities. The monasteries grew from small establishments to organizations of huge communities. Saint Benedict had established a famous monastery in Italy in 529, and Cluny had built another in Burgundy in 910 AD. The abbeys contributed significantly to the development of the arts and music. Abbess Hildegard popularized the practice of community singing among the Christians during prayers. Some groups of monks came to be known as the friars since the 13th century, and they traveled from place to place in order to preach their religion instead of living in secluded monasteries. These friars lived on charity. The lives of the monks and nuns, who also critiqued through literature, for example, Langland and Chaucer, writers of medieval England, compared and contrasted the lives of the simple farmers and laborers with that of the secluded, monastic and easy lives of the clergy. Lampoons of a nun, monk and a friar appeared in Chaucer's famous work, Canterbury Tales. The existing religious and folk traditions replaced or accommodated Christian customs and festivals. Christmas began to be celebrated on 25th of December to mark the birth of Jesus Christ, and this celebration replaced an old pre-Roman festival. Easter celebrations were fixed on the day when Christ supposedly resurrected following his crucifixion. However, the date was not fixed because it was merged with an earlier celebration of the start of spring. These holy days or holidays were meant to be spent in prayer with the coming of Christianity. However, the overworked peasants and laborers relaxed, rejuvenated, and feasted on this day. The second order in the medieval French society comprised of the nobles, lords, or landowners who had a significant role in the society because they controlled lands, levied taxes, and distributed lands to the clergy and the lesser nobles. They were linked to the peasants because of ownership of the lands through a practice called vassalage. In this practice of vassalage, the peasants were vassals of the feudal lords or landowners, and the feudal lords were vassals of the kings of France. The lords or seigneurs protected their vassals or dependents or subjects in exchange of their loyalty. The vassals became bonded to their masters through vows taken on the Bible in a church. To legitimize the bond of vassalage, the master gave the vassal a written charter or staff, and sometimes a clod of earth to symbolize that he was granting land to the vassal. The feudal lords who lived in manor houses had absolute power over their estates. A feudal lord owned villages, lands, and the farmers' lands and homes in his estate. He could coin his own money and establish his own judicial system. He could employ the farmers to work in his private lands and recruit them as the king's foot soldiers in times of war. The manorial estates were of varying sizes, with stretches of woodland or forests, pastures, crop fields, a church, and a castle for defense. The estates satisfied the needs of the lord, his families, and the people who lived in the estates. The different occupations including farming, stonemasonry, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and winepress workers. The only things which had to be exported from outside the estates in England and France were salt, metalware, millstones, luxurious furniture, musical instruments, and ornaments. The knights became prominent as local wars became more frequent across Europe. There was increased need for soldiers in the cavalry, and the farmers who had since then acted as foot soldiers did not suffice. This gave rise to a new social section called the knights, who were considered brave and heroic, and about whom many songs were written. The minstrels of France since the 12th century travelled from manor to manor, singing historical and fictional stories to entertain the kings and nobles. Some of these songs highly honoured the knights and kings. The knights were bound to their lords, who gave them a piece of land called fief, which could be inherited. The fiefdom consisted of many acres of land, a house, a church, houses for the knight's subjects or dependents, a watermill and a wine press. The knights paid regular fees to the lord and honed their skills of fencing and fighting to prepare for wars. The peasants consisted of the third order in the medieval European feudal society, and these peasants could be categorized as free or bound. The bound or unfree peasants were serfs, who cultivated plots of land which belonged to the lords. They had to give most of the produce to the lords from some of the lands they cultivated. Apart from these, they also performed unpaid labor on lands which belonged solely to the lords. They could not keep any of the crops they cultivated on these lands. Serfdom was equal to slavery, as they could not leave the lord's estates without his permission or marry someone of their choice without paying a fee to the lord. Besides, the serfs had to use the lord's mills, ovens, and wine presses. The free peasants cultivated their own lands but had to reserve some days of the week when they provided unpaid labor on their lord's lands. It was mandatory for the men to serve in the military 40 days a year and to provide unpaid services like digging ditches, collecting firewood, and repairing roads and buildings. The women and children worked as weavers, as candle makers, and in the wine presses. The peasants often had to pay a direct tax called taille to the king, from which nobles and knights were exempted. We will discuss the spread of feudalism in England in our next video. Till then, happy learning!